Hello everyone and welcome back to the Green Man channel, and in this video I'm going to attempt to rank the Soilwork discography from my least favourite to my favourite. Now how to do this really, it's not an easy task. I think Soilwork have done a number of really good albums, and they are one of the more underrated bands in metal, I think. Obviously, if you're a fan of melodic death and perhaps prog as well, you may have come across them, you may know them very well, but I think they tend to, perhaps don't get mentioned quite as much as bands like, At the Gates and In Flames. They tend to just fall slightly behind those, perhaps because they came about a little bit later in the whole Gothenburg scene and all that. I don't know, but I have kind of done this list, and it was interesting doing it. I mean, I do tend to find this with not all of my favourite bands, but a lot of them, the most recent albums are your kind of least favourite and the oldest ones are your favourite, and it tends to be a problem when you're doing these rankings. So I've tried to do this as well as I could without falling too much into that trap, but naturally I think we tend to find ourselves, if we're long-time fans, more sort of veering towards the older albums, and I think that's often because any band that's been around for a long time probably finds it hard to stay super original after they've written 7 or 8 different albums. In this case there are 11 studio albums that I'm looking at. I'm excluding the compilation album Death Resonance, which is actually a pretty good album of B-sides, and I'm also excluding their recent EP, partly because I've not really heard that much, and so I don't think it would be fair to include it in this list. Now, of course, predictably, my number 11 is actually Verklichten, I think is how you say it. This album never really landed with me. There's something about it that, it felt like kind of Soilwork over the years have evolved, which is fine, and they've become almost more hard rock than necessarily their sort of melodeath roots as the years have gone by. And for me, Verklichten, I did enjoy it, but it's not really to my taste of the Soilwork I really enjoy, I think. It was still had pretty good moments in it. I really liked the Ageless Whisper track on this one. I really liked that song, and they still have clearly their ability to write decent songs with pretty good lyrics and everything, and I think that is still pretty evident on this album. But that said, probably is my least favourite of their albums so far, and I haven't been back to it much since my first kind of few listens of it when this album first came back, which is always an indication to me that it's probably not going to end up being one of my favourites. In this case, I have put it as my least favourite. Number 10 is Sworn to a Great Divide, another album that's kind of slipped through my fingers, as it were, another one that I haven't revisited very much over the years. There is, however, a track on here which is the bonus track called A Martyr, I believe, and for some reason that is a bonus track. This track should be, I think one of the first tracks on the album. It's a fantastic Soilwork track, one of their best, one of my favourites. But on this album, it kind of stands alone for me. The other songs, the other tracks, there aren't too many others that particularly caught my attention, except this so-called, bonus track, which is actually amazing. Sworn to a Great Divide is probably just above Verklichten for me. Number 9 is The Ride Majestic, which is, I think that one was before Verklichten. And this one, I did enjoy this one, actually. I know it's quite low down on my list, but that doesn't mean I didn't like it. It just figures that Soilwork have put out a lot of great albums. And this one, it kind of, I thought there were a few pretty fantastic tracks, but there were also a few that didn't ring. So for me, this one's a bit of a mixed bag in Soilwork's discography, by my taste. Next on my list is the Panic Broadcast from 2010, and I gave this another listen recently, so I have revisited this pretty recently, and I did really quite enjoy it. Listen, there's a track called Epitome, which I had almost forgotten slightly about, how good that one was. Obviously, the one they play live a lot, Let the River Flow, is a pretty good track too. There's some really good songwriting on this album, I think, to be fair. I mean, it maybe doesn't have the bite of some of their earlier albums, and that's the kind of metal bite that I love, and so I'm always slightly biased that way, I think, and perhaps that's going to be self-evident with this list. But there's some really good songwriting on this album. I think it's a pretty good one to listen to, just as a sort of bit of variation from their other albums, I think. And Panic Broadcast is a good album. It's a solid album. The next one on my list is perhaps this is number 7. This is Stabbing the Drama. Now, this would be much higher up on a lot of people's lists, and this was commercially maybe their most successful album, I think. I believe the track Stabbing the Drama, the title track, was actually on the soundtrack to the second Saw film. And I remember that. But actually, the album as a whole, it's got some pretty good hits on here. It's got some really cool hooks and some good, memorable Soilwork songs. But as a whole, I didn't feel like the album stands out as much as some of their other albums. So it actually only comes in at number 7, shockingly, on my list. And I'm sure that will meet with some disagreement in Soilwork fan base. But yeah, it's just this is so difficult to do in a way that something's going to come slightly lower that is unexpected, I think. Number 6 for me is actually figure number 5. Kind of this album is an interesting one. It's still kind of there, sort of in their mellow death phase a bit. It's also very, there's elements of almost a poppiness slightly. There's a couple of real hits in this. I think of Departure Plan particularly, and I loved that song when I first heard it, but now it's kind of like, maybe, it's a good song to me then, but is it so good now? And it's a very catchy number. And it's got Rejection Roll, which is one of their best openers, I think, to any album they've done. And it has, a few other really cracking tracks on this one. But I suppose, for me, this isn't quite one of their top 5. Just misses out on the top 5 for me. Why? I guess again, I guess it's just not one that I actually haven't revisited that much. I do love a few of songs on the album, but yeah, I've not been back to it as much as the top 5 that I'm about to give to you or reveal to you now. At number 5, we have Steel Bath Suicides, their first album, and this one is a bit of a, there's so many good, heavy, almost groovy riffs on here. There's a track in particular which I'm thinking about on Steel Bath Suicide, which is I'm gonna have to remember. I think it's My Knees. That track is a sick groove on that track, and there's a few others like that on this album. And I love Steel Bath Suicide. I think it's got the raw Soilwork, the early Soilwork that I did really love, and I can't sort of detach myself from that love. I just really love that sort of early, biting, harsh. Bjorn Stritz, I do like his clean vocals, but those early harsh vocals and the riffing, the guitaring, the guitar. A lot of their sort of early thrashy stuff, the really more brutal side of Soilwork, I really enjoyed an awful lot in their early years, and I sort of miss that a bit now, even though their new material is still good. I do miss that sort of early thrashy side that they had, with just amazing work on the guitars. Now, next up on my list is perhaps this is the most recent album that is the highest on my list, and this is The Living Infinite, which is kind of a double disc, wasn't it? And interesting that this album really grew and grew and grew on me over time. At first, I was actually a little bit unsure about it, but then I really like the tracks on here. The songwriting's excellent. I think there's a lot of variety within the 2 discs. I think you don't really know, you can't predict the songs. I think whereas with albums like the Panic Broadcast and Sworn to a Great Divide, it feels like you can sort of see where they're going with that album. But I love the unpredictable nature of The Living Infinite, and you can't quite tell what the next song's going to be like because there's quite a lot of variety, but it's all variety which sounds really good, and it doesn't feel like, it's still Soilwork. It never goes too far astray for me from you know the Soilwork sound, and it was fresh at the time, and I just think this album is a really, really good one and one of their best. And I'm pleased to say it's actually a recent one, which is in my top five. I say recent, 8 years ago now, probably not that recent, but anyway. Um, Number three. So we get to the top three now, and these are just pure classics, Soilwork greats, if you like. And number three is Predator's Portrait. This could be higher. There was a bit of an issue I had with the production on this album. Just sounded kind of scratchy and not quite, not that thick, lush sound that you want with a really good metal album, or at least I tend to prefer that. Not everybody does, but I like to kind of think this could have been so much better with a better mix, and it just felt, you know, if you think about it, this is my number three choice, and with that mix being a bit better, I think this would be my, maybe my number one. It's so good. I mean, you just read off the track list with tracks like Bastard Chain, Shadow Child, and these are wonderful melodic death tracks that you shouldn't miss. Number two, Natural Born Chaos. Oh, what an album that is, and number one choice for most Soilwork fans, perhaps. I don't know. But this is a fantastic, all-round, brilliant, wonderful flow from start to finish that this album has, and it's perhaps has a favourite track of all time of mine on this album, which is Flame Out. That is maybe a number one Soilwork song for me, possibly, certainly in the top five of my favourites, I think. What an album this is from the start to the finish. If you're a Soilwork fan and you don't like Natural Born Chaos, I would wonder what was wrong with you, to be honest. But anyway, I'll move on. Number one, my absolute favourite, which I revealed recently in my what's going on with my voice? Which I revealed recently in my Game Changer series, and that was the Chain Heart Machine. Have I fallen here for a sentimental pick as my number one? A bit. I mean, this album got me fully into Soilwork. This is just a bit of a masterpiece for me, an example of melodeath executed pretty much perfectly. Every track is a bit of a banger, and you're just hooked on it. I remember the first time I listened to it, I was thinking, wow, I hadn't heard anything quite like that. And you have to remember, when I first picked up the Chain Heart Machine, I wasn't all that, used to melodeath and, varieties of death metal. So this was like a massive wake-up call to me, and this album got me into a lot of melodeath. As I said in the Game Changer series thing video that I did, this is an absolute favourite. So I had to put it at number one, I'm afraid. If that was a little bit predictable, if you saw my other video, I apologise. But I hope you've enjoyed this discography ranking. Feel free, if you happen to be passing by the channel, to put in your favourites or your top, what would be your 11, and maybe you want to include A Whisper of the Atlantic and Death Resonance, which is fine. You're welcome to do that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.